So today, my name is Bohlin. I go by they, them pronouns, or any pronouns used in respect. And today I'm going to talk about the power in community knowledge and peer-to-peer education. So today I'm going to be discussing the power of communal education. To do this, we have to challenge our understandings of who can educate, what spaces are educational, and the hierarchies that delegitimize community knowledge. At the end of this talk, every one of us must critically question how we are able to queer communal knowledge practices and how we are complacent in the oppression of knowledge. So who can educate? This is a complex answer based on the spaces we inhabit. Every person who promotes insight is educating. Everyone is an expert in their lived experience and can inform the conversation with their personal identities. Those that can educate may also not be present in the room or the conversation, or not respected in the spaces that education occurs. In our recognition of the power of education, we also must seek the full empowerment of those who experience the most oppression. This is a concept called trickle-up social justice, as proposed by Dean Spade. And he states that we must center those who are most marginalized, whose lived experience and knowledge lift up the solutions and ideas that empower all society, rather than just a chosen few. Think for a moment of places you consider to be educational. You probably think of classrooms and lecture halls here at Purdue. Well, we must challenge this understanding of knowledge-sharing spaces. Bars, prisons, barbershops, and homes must be recognized as spaces that can host educational conversations. We have been taught to think that knowledge is not shared in these certain spaces, and then it is immediately subject. Which brings us to an immense challenge. We must challenge the ideas that knowledge can only be created in certain forms. Peer review and verified sources provide important insights, but are not the only form of knowledge. We must stop holding these as the only legitimate source and instead recognize that it is vital to have the narratives of communities as sources of knowledge. So where do I fit in both delegitimizing and uplifting knowledge? I'm a white, queer, trans, fat, poor, and mentally ill person. I bring with me a complexity of identities that bring with it a series of knowledge. As a student activist, I often act as a peer educator. And I often experience education through one-on-one conversations that are often impromptu and confidential. Hence why there's no pictures of me in those conversations. Education means meeting people where they're at and recognizing where I am. When I was a supervisor for Boiler Gold Rush, I was often the only person asked about queer and sexual health topics, even though I was not the only out queer person in the program. However, I was able to draw from communal knowledge and educate across those gaps. Communal education means accepting that I do not understand some things. When meeting Virgie Tovar, a fat activist and intersectional feminist, I realized that I did not understand myself as a fat white person. I also barely understood racism and how I was complicit in it. Through reading and stepping back to learning rather than just educating, I grew in my abilities to educate others. And at this point, and this is really the point of community-based education, it means educating yourself through what means you have, but ultimately learning from those around you. Through the communities I've inhabited at Purdue, I've been able to constantly engage in education outside of the barriers that define it. I've been able to learn from those whose lives and experiences differ from mine. And when I think about it, I think about how my coursework was important in understanding concepts and theories, but ultimately it was the knowledge that I gained and shared from others that empowered me to think of a reality I wanted to live in, rather than be complacent in the one that exists now. So how can we begin to respect the power of knowledge from communities? The definition of allyship provides the beginnings of an answer. I once read that allyship is a continuous process, rather than a concrete identity. This must be how we work to create communities of mutual education. We must recognize that we are favoring models of education that exclude and delegitimize power and be better. To do this, we have to look at the past. We have to look at folks like Ella Baker, whose work in the civil rights movement was influenced by her ability to educate those around her. Or Sylvia Rivera, a veteran of the 1969 Stonewall Uprising, who fought against the exclusion of transgender people. We need to deconstruct models of hierarchy and power. When people are told that their knowledge is less worthy due to their position, we replicate the narratives that some form of knowledge are inherently worth less. We replicate this type of thinking, and it only perpetrates oppression and does not result in long-term liberation. Instead, we have to listen to communities. So what are the impacts of ignoring community knowledge? A good example is Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was signed into law in 1994. The policy allowed LGBT folks to serve in the military as long as they were closeted. This policy reflected what happens when policies are enacted and those who are most affected are not listened to. This also highlights the need for community-based knowledge. I believe that folks know what they need, but often lack access to resources and power to make it happen. We see this in the efforts of ACT UP during the AIDS crisis of the 1980s. They knew what they needed, life-saving drugs, and they went against the government in order to get those. What if instead of asking communities for science and proof of the reality of what they're living, we instead just listened to them? If we gave Flint the resources to have clean water, or if we gave immigrants the ability to have happy and successful lives, no matter where they lived. The idea is not new, but it is radical. We want to feel safe in the facts and the statistics. Even I'm guilty of saying I love data, because I do. But no matter your role, data and institutionalized facts have become a milestone where we form opinion and make decisions. While these numbers are relevant, they cannot guide our work because then we decenter community knowledge. As a final example, I want to point to an event called the Sex Fair, which I've organized for the past 2 years. During the fair, I was worried about attendance, and it wasn't until days later that I realized that the goal of sexual education should have been the first thing in my mind. Instead, I was worried about quantity, rather than realizing that even a single person walking out of there more educated about their body was a success. Communal knowledge sharing is key to liberation and survival. Hierarchy, titles, metrics, they all tend to force us into traditional ways of communicating knowledge. We need to build a reality where the most genuine forms of knowledge are respected and elevated. This will aid us in providing communities access to the resources they know they need, which means we must listen when people spend the time and energy to share their knowledge. Thank you.